Welcome to the Shudder. I've got 3 viewer submissions for you. All wanted to remain anonymous. They're all Bigfoot encounters that I found most interesting and informative. Never be surprised at how much you can learn about these creatures from listening to others' encounter stories. You probably learn more about them that way than listening to the quote-unquote experts. Okay, the first account is from Mike, then Larry, and the last is from the Harmonica Man. Okay, fluff up that futon and settle in. My friend and I went on a fishing trip to a local creek in the remote woods of Caswell County, North Carolina, just south of the Virginia state line. We knew a dam prevented the large striped bass and catfish from getting any further upstream in the river, but we also knew the big creek flows into the river below the dam and makes for easier catching for large fish. When this incident occurred, I wanted to tell it, but Chris, my friend since middle school, who is deceased now, was adamantly opposed. He said, "They'll think we're crazy and was drinking or on drugs, man." I promise you, we weren't any of the 3. Chris also said his whole family, grandfather, dad, and uncles, all grew up hunting and fishing in these woods and had never said anything about there being a monster, Bigfoot, or whatever around. I only told close family and doubt if some of them believed me. Anyway, it was about 12:30 a.m. or so, and we heard something very heavy walking across the creek in the swamp. I asked him, "Chris, are there cows down here?" His reply was, "Did you bring your shotgun?" I said, "Yeah." "What the heck is that? I can feel it walking." He said, "Get it, Michael. I don't know what that is." I had my 12-gauge pump action laying on the ground right by my feet. There's always been wild hogs around these woods and the occasional bear. That's why I thought to lay it there with 3 rounds of double-aught buckshot in the magazine. I picked it up and yelled out, "Hey over there, if you're playing around, I'm not. I've got a shotgun, and I will bust your butt." It was dead quiet for around a minute. Then we heard a grumbling growl sound like I'd never heard in my life. I told Chris, "Don't make a sound." Just like when we ran deer with dogs and squirrel hunted together 100 times before, he made the unmistakable motion to pump it to it. Whatever it was, all I could make out was a dark shadow, very big and just outside of the lantern light. I quickly pumped 3 rounds into the shadow in quick succession. Whatever it was took off, and the ground shook as a blood-curdling scream rang out as this thing ran away from us. I looked over at my best friend, and he was white as a ghost. We just sat there looking across the creek and then back and forth at each other. About 5 minutes later, it came back, except there were 2 this time, and they were not slipping easily through the brush. They were growling, hitting trees, and tossing branches in the creek. We made haste at that point and got the heck out of there. I had actually considered leaving my shotgun in the truck that evening. I don't care what anyone says about shooting a Bigfoot. I'm glad I didn't. We went back the next morning with rifles and saw what looked like someone had driven a tank through the swamp and could see large tracks mixed in the destruction. Neither of us were afraid in daylight hours, not armed anyway. Both of us had taken many deer at full run through the timber and believed it would take an army of whatever it was to take us in daylight hours. We may have been stupid kids at 17, but we were not crazy. There's not an animal I know of that'll take being shot or shot at from close range that will return in 5 minutes. Not one. An older cousin of mine had asked if I wanted to hunt his property. He had planted fields, but no one was hunting them. I gratefully accepted and got prepared for the season. The field I chose had a swamp on one side and cutover on the other. It was the perfect pass-through for deer. The day of my experience, I had gone in before daylight and climbed into his very large shooting house. It was so big, I could bring a pillow and blanket and stretch out inside it. I stayed all day long, and finally about 4 p.m., a large group of does came into the field. I waited for a buck, but none showed. I had 2 doe tags to fill, so I picked the largest doe and took my shot. The rest of the does ran off into the cutover and thicket. I waited a little longer, but decided to climb out of the shooting house as it was getting dark. I left my backpack there by the shooting house and only took my rifle and cheap flashlight into the back of the field to find my doe. Once I got there, I found a few spots of blood heading down into the thicket and was following the trail when suddenly, from behind me and coming from behind the shooting house, was a weird growl. It kept moving closer to me. I shined my extra dim flashlight in that direction, but never saw anything. I was starting to get scared. I held the rifle and flashlight pointed in the direction of the growl, thinking I'll get one shot at it, and that's it. Then, whatever it is will probably get me. Suddenly, from over the hill, I hear a 4-wheeler coming. Whatever it was must have heard it too, because the growling stopped. I was quite relieved. It was my cousin. He had heard me shoot, and came to see if I got a deer and if I needed help with it. We picked up the trail where I left off, found the deer, and got out of the woods. I told everyone what I had heard, and they all laughed and said I had been living in the city too long. I did not hunt there anymore. The following year, my nephew and I went back to the property. My nephew went to that shooting house because I certainly wasn't going back there. It's a wonder I was back in the woods at all. We hunted the whole day, but saw no deer. When I went to pick him up at dark, he asked if I had tried to scare him. I said, "No way, you have a .30-06 rifle and I'm not that dumb." He proceeded to tell me that just before I got there, the shooting house began shaking violently, like someone was trying to push it over. He said he was screaming at the door, stating his name and that he had permission to be there. He said it lasted for several minutes and was aiming his gun at the door the whole time. Like before, the action stopped when the sound of the 4-wheeler could be heard coming. I was actually glad someone else had experienced something in that swamp bottom. It confirmed that what I had experienced actually happened and reminded him and others not to make fun, because you just might be the next one to run into whatever was out there. I don't know what it was, but the suspects are limited. I believe that had to be the territory of a Bigfoot. I think I have to get this out and share my story. I live in a tiny cabin at the edge of a wooded swamp. It patches out along various farmers' fields where game animals can thrive. They trek back and forth close to the cabin as if the wood line is a funnel for their trails to meet. It would only make sense, at least in my mind, that predators would be on the fringe stalking their prey. The locals have game cams out that frequently pick up a cougar, bear, and bobcat. It's a testament to the volume of food they have available in the area, and there are stories of these creatures in this area dating back for centuries. It seems like a silent little secret that nobody wants to talk about openly. The locals have suppressed the stories in fear of ridicule. The indigenous tribes still remember and pass the legends on through their cultures, which is a good thing. There are many stories of strange things here, but for now, I'll stick to my story and try to have as much continuity as possible. I bought the cabin after becoming a disabled person and required a cheap place to live in peace. I wasn't in the place for more than a few months when I got a dog from a friend who needed a good home. One summer night, I had the windows open. I was enjoying a slight breeze and the sounds of the night as I slept. About 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning, I awoke to a growl from the dog and then a whimper. I paid little attention as I thought there might be a thunderstorm approaching or some other mundane thing. I rolled over, took a deep breath, and thought to myself how refreshing and peaceful my night was going to be. Of course, I turned out to be quite wrong. Just about a minute later, I heard what sounded like a couple of samurai warriors talking to each other. It startled me enough to sit up, turn, and place my feet on the floor. I listened for a little while, and the conversation grew nearer. It sounded like they were at the corner of the road, just 200 feet away. I thought someone was messing around like drunks and poachers sometimes do in the middle of the night. The language sounded rough and foreign to me, yet seemed like a question and answer type of conversation. Unintelligible words, phrases, grunts, and snorts bellowed out and echoed through the window. The dog sprung a leak and peed all over the house, then squeezed under my bed. She was scared out of her wits, and I was getting mad about it. I yelled out, "Hey, shut up and get out of here. I'm calling the police." A few seconds went by, and everything was silent except for the shivering bones hitting the floor and bed from the dog. She squeezed under just a few inches of space, which amazed me, even though she made the bed flop as she went under it. That's when I heard a snort or grunt, then a loud voice saying what sounded like, "Oh, why?" It rattled the back window like it usually did when a big truck would go by. The voice didn't have the upward inflection of asking a question, though. It was more of a commanding sound full of anger. Then, who or whatever it was stomped through the thick part of the wood line behind the house. They were breaking branches on their way through to the big woods. The sticks kept breaking, but faded into the distance. It was over in just a couple of minutes, and I was almost frozen from the fact that I knew these were not humans. It wasn't until a half dozen or so years later that we saw one of them. I was walking the dog again, but this time just on the side of the road. We had 6 inches of slush that fell overnight, and I didn't feel like walking around getting soaked from the knees down, so we stuck to the road that day. Even though the morning was a little misty and foggy, you could see for a long way. It seemed to be holding near the ground, like an old Vincent Price movie. We were almost home, just a couple of 100 yards away. The little hill we descended had pines on one side and hardwoods on the other. That's when I heard a branch break, then a low grunt or breath, I couldn't tell which. My first thought was there's a bear in the ditch, just out of hibernation. You know when you go past planted red pines and you can see rows at a 45-degree angle? Well, that's what it was like, and there was one of the oddball white pines about 10 feet tall in the middle of the row, about 20 or 30 yards away. I was stunned to see a Bigfoot standing in front of the tree like it was trying to blend in. It was 3/4 the size of the tree, but just as wide. I could see black and dark gray patchy fur all over except for its face. It looked like a pencil sketching, and even shaded whites of its eyes. It was a little distance away, so the details couldn't be made out well. A little mist on my glasses obscured my vision as well, but not enough to where I was blind or seeing things from an active imagination. This was obvious and real. The dog and I must have walked past that same spot hundreds of times and never had seen this. I stared at it for a few seconds, but didn't know what my best move was. I did, however, gather the strength to say, "Hello there," in the nicest way possible. I followed up with, "We're just passing through and going home. We mean no harm." It did not move a muscle, not even a blink, and kept glaring. Just then, the dog came to the end of her leash and was standing on her hind legs, choking herself. She was trying to get to something on the other side of the road. I didn't see anything, though she seemed to, and was completely overcome with her instinct to go after it. I gave a little tug and said, "Come on, Athena, let's go home." When I looked back toward the creature, it was gone, and daylight shone through the tree onto the white of the wet snow behind it. I looked left one more time to where the dog was concerned. "It's time to go," I said, and pulled her toward our home. She bolted in that direction and came to the end of her lead, again choking herself. I'll bet she caught a whiff of whatever it was and came to her senses, then changed her mind. She seemed scared now and couldn't wait to get back inside the house. That was the big stuff that day, but little stuff kept happening throughout the years and even today. There are the typical wood knocks at night and sometimes in the day. Even been hit with pine cones from the side and behind me where no pines grew. There was one summer where dead animals would show up under my bedroom window every other day for about a month. Once, there was a toddler's green shoe sitting on a stump next to some stacked rocks where we walked. I picked it up and moved it to another stump about half a mile away, deeper in the forest. I made sure it was far away from the typical human trails and roads. That way, it wouldn't be obvious to anyone cutting through the property. For some odd reason, it found its way to the neighbor's cabin, sitting on the porch when we finally got there. It was like something made a big circle around us just to get ahead. Then it left the obvious sign of an intelligence messing with us with the bright-colored shoe. Though my little dog passed in the spring, I still go for walks once in a while for health reasons. It's quieter in the cabin now and a little lonelier. I do have something tapping on the side of the house every other night in the summer. It sounds like someone's knocking, so I get up, turn on the yard light, and then double-check all the locks. Then it's back to bed or sleeping in the recliner with my rifle close by. The loggers came in late summer to my surprise and took out half of the forest around me and left big gaping trenches from the heavy equipment. The place looked horrible and tore up everywhere. Hundreds of acres of berry bushes were now mud pits that we have to run and leap over just to get through now. Since then, I've only heard one scream during my sunrise walk and what sounded like a couple of wood knocks in the distance. The Sasquatch appear to have moved on, and I don't blame them. I'm just grateful not to see another one looking at me like it wants to kill me or something. I felt this story needed to be told, just so it doesn't get lost forever. I'll continue on writing my books and being a happy person right up to the end, which I hope is a long time from now. At some point, I would like answers about the Bigfoot people and the truth is exposed to the public about them. It would bring me peace to see disclosure in my lifetime. That's my story, and I hope you found it interesting. I'm sending thoughts of happiness your way, and hope life treats you well. Signed, Harmonica Man. Wow, what a great story. In correspondence with Harmonica Man, I discovered that he has a YouTube channel called The Harmonica Man. If you enjoy the harmonica, I put the link to it in the description. I really enjoyed telling all those encounters. If you enjoyed hearing them, consider hitting that thumbs up and sharing. As always, thank you for listening, and if you subscribe, make sure you hit that notification bell so you can join me here next time for the Shudder.